Do you want to animate like BFDIA? I'm a BFDIA animator, and I'm going to show you how we animate the characters. I'll be teaching you how to pose them, animate them, lip sync, and how to create custom assets like arms and mouths. Let's get into it. Part 1. Setup. First off, we're going to go to bfdi.tv/assets to download the BFDI assets and set up our character. I'll be animating with Pin. The issue with the BFDI assets file is that the mouths are not in a symbol together that allow us to use Frame Picker. To fix this issue, simply place all of the mouths you want to use onto the stage, select them all, convert them to symbol, select them inside the symbol, and press distribute to keyframes. This will put all of the mouths on their own keyframe. As long as the symbol is a graphic, you will be able to use Frame Picker to lip sync. Once you set up the character, you can import the audio you'd like to use into the stage.
Bubble, your alliance is dead. And besides, we've got a lot in common.
Now that we're all set up, we can move on to part 2. Posing. Before we begin, I want to say I use a lot of keyboard shortcuts, and you can too. Simply go to Edit, scroll down to Keyboard Shortcuts, and you can create your own. Personally, I use F9 to insert tweens, F6 to insert keyframes, Shift period to flip horizontally, Shift question mark to flip vertically, and F10 to swap symbols. These make my animation much faster, and I highly recommend it. Moving on. Before I start using tweens to create motions, I like to create all of the poses and keyframes for each pose I think the character will make throughout their line. Another trick I use is to place these green lines inside the body of the character, so I can keep their body matched up with their legs. A character's legs should usually stay in the same place they were on a character's body, but it's hard to keep track of that, especially as a beginner. Also, when I'm skewing the legs left and right like so, I hold down the Alt key on my keyboard, so the bottom of the feet don't move as well. You can see I squash or stretch some of the limbs while I'm making these poses. That keeps the limbs dynamic and creates better poses, which is a staple in BFDIA animation. Unlike the legs, the arms can move slightly in and out of place. Here, I move one arm across Pin's entire body. As long as it looks good to you, anything goes. Now that all of our poses are created, we can move on to part 3, Inbetweens. Inbetweens, or just tweens as we call them, allow our characters to come to life by creating the movements in between keyframes. Once you create this tween, there are a ton of options for eases. Eases dictate how fast a character moves in and out of their movement. I'm a fan of quart, cubic, and quad ease-ins. Quart ease-ins make the ease-in very fast and sharp, which a lot of basic movements in BFDIA are. For ease-outs, I primarily use quad ease-outs, which allow them to be very bouncy and soft. For this first movement to our first pose, we'll place a tween and make it a quart ease-in. We can see both arms flip during this tween, so we'll simply create keyframes and drag them to the end, and then move the arms ourselves how we think they should move. Next, we're onto the secondary movement. BFDIA uses a lot of recoils, which is when a character moves and then bounces backward after, as shown here. What we're going to do to accomplish this is we'll place a keyframe a few frames after this pose. Then we'll go back to that original pose and exaggerate it a little. Move Pin a bit more upwards and to the right, but we won't rotate her. Recoils in BFDIA primarily have no change in rotation and makes the animation a bit punchier. Then we'll create another tween here and make it a quad ease out. As a last step, to make this movement more punchy, we're actually going to place a set of keyframes right before this middle set of keyframes and then make Pin rotate a little less. This creates a large difference between this keyframe set and this keyframe set, which creates a huge punch. That's how most movements operate in BFDIA. As we continue this process of adding tweens and keyframes, you'll see that during especially fast movements, as shown here, arms will begin to stretch. This is called a smear frame, and they're used often in BFDIA as it's a cartoonish way to show how fast a character is moving. Smear frames also help blend movements by making the transition from one arm to another seamless. For any blinking, you simply give the character closed eyes, and when they open their eyes again, stretch the eyes upward. That's all there is to it. For this movement, when Pin needs to look to her left, we have to move this left eye manually, so it seamlessly disappears. If we don't make our movements smooth, they look really choppy. We have to make everything kind of blend. That's a huge part of BFDIA animation. Once the tweens are all inserted, the animation is complete, except for part 4, lip sync. Lip syncing is a straightforward process. You listen to the sound coming from the sound wave on your timeline and match that sound with the mouths available. Open mouths create sounds like ah, and eh, while closed mouths create M, B, and P sounds. The closed teeth mouth is responsible for sounds like T, S, L, TH, CH, C, and K, and the O mouth is responsible for O's and O's. The F mouth is only really responsible for F sounds. You can go keyframe by keyframe and listen to every sound to place every mouth. Or you can use a process called reading the sound waves. More experienced animators do this, where you don't listen to the sound waves, but read them by assuming which peaks and valleys are attached to which syllable in the line. Although you most likely have to go back and edit the lip syncing to match this up perfectly, it is still a quicker process than listening to every single frame of audio. Once the lip sync is complete, your animation can be finished, unless you want to create Part 5, Custom Assets. The most important part of custom assets is matching the style. You can make any kind of mouth shape you want as long as the line thickness matches the other mouths and the shading and color. I'm not a great artist, so I just made this random happy smile mouth for Pin. The outline of the mouth is 2.4, as are the original mouths, and the inner line is 1.5. Then I used the eyedrop tool on an old mouth to get the gray shading to put it on the new mouth, and I also tried to shade it in the same spots the original had. The mouth doesn't look great, but it is in style. As for limbs, the same principle goes. I used a line around 2.5 to 3 to create the initial line, and then I make sure the hand and fingers are the same size as the other hands in the file. Once I have a good shape, I create the line to fill and make the beginning of the arm a little thinner and the end thicker, much like the straight arm and the arm bent look. You can play around with this and even create new hands, but it's a simple process that adds more creativity and fun to your character's movements. Overall, this is what the final animation looks like, and I think it turned out pretty well. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and check out another video.